Hello, my name is David Turner and this is the Lunar Poetry podcast. This episode it's going to be a special ranting edition with poet Tim Wells.
Alright, how you doing?
Hello Tim.
Pretty good, how's you?
I'm alright, we're out on the street so
yep.
You may hear some noises, but that's life.
The noises are you, not me.
Yes, yeah. We might start with a poem, I think.
Alright, let's have a look. So I'll go, this is one of mine from school, so it's proper ranting. I love my flag, I do, that floats upon the breeze. I also love my arms, my legs, my feet, my toes, my knees. One little shell might spoil them all to give them such a twist. They would be of no use to me, so I guess I won't enlist. I love my country, yes I do, and I hope men do well. Without their arms and legs and things, I think they look like hell. Men with faces harsh or offer unfit to be kissed. I've read in books it spoils their look, so I guess I won't enlist. I love our leaders, sure I do, in a bunker underground. When the atom bombs go off, they won't hear a sound. If we gave them rifles, how long would they exist? They're not fighting, why should I? So I guess I won't enlist.
Thank you very much.
Well, hey.
Yeah, thanks again for joining us, Tim. I probably should just start at the beginning, I suppose. And when did Ranting Poetry begin? And also, when did it become known as Ranting Poetry?
Well, it became known as Ranting Poetry quite early on, so we kind of started really early 80s, so looking sort of around late 80, 81. And it's Stephen Wells really kicked the term off with, he had a fanzine at the time called Molotov Comics.
Okay.
So it kind of come from that. And then sort of 82 to around 84, there was a lot of ranting. I mean, you had stuff, in those days we had national music papers, so music papers are covering a lot of stuff. This is a lot of stuff I've been blogging. In those days there was like 4 TV stations, so there was quite a bit of stuff on TV.
Yeah.
And so the profile of ranting was good. There were a lot of live gigs, and we used to gig with a lot of bands, so we wouldn't just stick to poetry audiences, which is pretty good because they were very few and far between in those days.
Yeah.
I mean, we still had hippies in those days, that's how bad it was. And so we toured with a lot of like punk bands, we do stuff at a lot of reggae shows as well, and really the sort of grand swell of like punk music and reggae music I think were really part and parcel of ranting poetry.
Yeah, and it seems just from we're going to go on and talk about the stand-up and spit thing, but just like taking even a brief look at it, the fanzine seemed to be a big
Definitely.
thing with sort of spreading the word. Or
I mean, you might come as a shock to you, but there's no internet in those days.
I hadn't even considered that.
You see, you Google it, it doesn't even come up.
Yeah, and also, how did Ranting Poetry develop? Was it a movement? I'm going to call it a movement anyway, whether we disagree on that term or not, because it's too long to go into. But did the movement develop under its own steam, or because it can seem from looking back on it now, like it was almost just a rejection of other ideas and beliefs, you know?
I think there definitely was a lot of rejection of miserableism, as we used to call it at the time, and I think they still call it miserableism because that's what it was. There was definitely a rejection of that, but at the same time I think when you're looking at ranting, I think it was a moment rather than a particular style, because there was a lot of, in actual fact there was a lot of diversity in it, but what it did have in common was people getting up and having a pop.
Yeah.
And I think that to me was the important thing, rather more than the literary content these days, to be honest.
Yeah.
But I think the sort of bare knuckle get up and say it and make people listen. I think that was what was going on.
And do you think that how easy is the ranting style to define?
Well,
is
again,
that a lazy view, thinking that it's a particular style?
I mean, I think people like Attila and Stephen Wells had a particular style, but again, I think someone like Jules or Ben Zephaniah was completely different from that. But they're equally important as ranting poets. So, but what they did have in common, we had the same enemies, and we were standing on the same stages. So I think, to me, that's the crucial bit.
Yeah, it seems definitely with what I've been finding out recently, it seemed to be much more about unity than. It wasn't just about smashing down the established.
Well, you've got to build as well.
Yeah,
smashing down's fun.
Yes.
And important, but you've got to build as well. And unity, I think, is now an important message, and it definitely was then as well. I mean, as bad as things are now, the fact in those days that black and white people on the same stage was quite radical, quite often.
But so I was speaking to, interviewed Niall O'Sullivan recently. That interview is going to go out in June, but he made the point that you know, it was perhaps important for a lot of ranting poetry to be fairly simple in style because you're trying to grab people's attention, because you weren't standing up at the poetry cafe to captive audiences, were you? You were just trying to get people's attention between bands and stuff.
And also because we were doing stuff between bands, a lot of the time, a lot of the audience wouldn't like it.
Yes.
So if you just had a machine gun approach, there were no gaps.
Yes, you can't get heckled if you don't shut up, can you, I suppose?
Exactly. So there was definitely a lot of people who did that.
Yeah. And who were your audiences?
All sorts of people. I mean, like I said, there really wasn't a poetry circuit as such in those days. There was a tiny one, and that was full of like quite tiresome beat poetry types.
Yeah.
Who I'm really glad to see the back of, to be honest. So the audience would be people in pubs, football fans, reggae crowds, punk skinheads. Just, I mean, people are more selective where they go out now, but early 80s we just went out. We'd just go out. If there's something to do, we'd go. It was, you know, we didn't have computers, we didn't have the internet.
Yeah.
The only porn we got was found in Edges. It wasn't on the interweb.
Yeah.
You know.
And what sort of venues were you playing? Outside of probably the music venues that we talked about now, but
mostly music venues, really, but a lot of pub gigs, hell of a lot of pub gigs, and anywhere. I mean, also, there were a lot of anti-apartheid was really big, miners' strike was really big, and we were gigging a lot around those kind of issues as well.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of gigs with those kind of people.
Actually, I was going to move on to that. A lot of people might have the impression that ranting poets constantly faced hostile crowds, but how accurate is that? Because
sometimes we made them hostile.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't always hostile. Sometimes it was, without a doubt. And I mean, even now, I don't like an easy crowd. I like to split an audience, and I was certainly doing the same then. And Swells certainly was very antagonistic. Attila was much more, let's pull people together. So no, I mean,
I was talking to Janine Booth recently. And she was talking about, you know, the gigging at benefits as well, and you know, can't imagine you'd get heckled at a benefit. But I suppose it's possible. I mean, you still wind people up, I'm sure.
Hey, there's always a drunk. Don't you worry about that.
Yeah. Maybe we could have another poem or two.
All right, well, let's have a Stephen Wells poem. So this is pretty much a Stephen Wells declaration of war, really. This is called Poetry. The poetry limpricks limp on endlessly churning out poetry, be stuck up in galleries and worshipped by the cognoscenti. Yes, darlings, but is it art? Sad old men discuss their problems like the last time I maintained erections back in 1967. When poetry stank of peace and love, the perfume pen and the velvet glove, the me generation's blubbering hitmen, zen and the art of being boring. When adulation meant rows and rows of slowly dozing folk in the know, the guardian crippled self-appointed art critics, oh God, he's finished. Yes, that was marvellous. Amazing syntax, a powerful image. Never mind his mindless garbage, it's poetry, darling, art. Me, I did this, me. And Roger went and got pissed back in 67 when poetry meant the after effects of too much booze down well-scrubbed necks, conversations with marijuana plants subsidised by our council grants, paying for the public wank, and sold to the giggling perfume ranks of Laura Ashley acid heads. Poetry choked on its own foul offal. Poetry, man, is fucking awful. Poetry is dead. Official.
Cheers, man. Actually, I hadn't quite written it down, but it struck me that it must have been quite nice when ranting poetry first started, because you weren't surrounded by a spoken word scene mainly made up of people who wanted to be famous, or you know,
it was a good way of not becoming famous.
Yes, Whereas now I think a big problem that spoken word faces is that people think it's just a route into YouTube and then to be spotted, and rather than, you know, just doing it for for what it is, rather than considering it.
I mean, there are good people on YouTube, and there are people who write for YouTube. So, but we didn't have YouTube.
No.
You were held to account.
Yeah.
Directly.
Maybe you could talk me through a bit some of the some of the poets, that were involved from the beginning, and
well,
because some of them are not around at all, and a lot of them are around but not gigging. And
well, Stephen Wells, definitely one of the first and biggest. He's dead now. He was quite important. He ran a fanzine called Molotov Comics. He lived up in Bradford, which is quite a big centre for ranting poetry. Tilla's probably the other sort of best known name. Tiller the stockbroker, still gigging, still doing a lot of gigs, and actually he's consistently gigged since. Yes. pretty much supporting the same sort of causes, saying the same sort of things, and good on him. Porky the Poet, who drifted off into comedy, but come back doing a hell of a lot of poetry gigs, and good ones too. Jules Denby, who was Bradford as well, definitely important writer, and she's, as far as I know, writing quite a lot of sort of crime stuff, crime novels these days, and seems to be doing quite well for herself, which is good. Janine, who I know you interviewed recently, it was the Big J. There was Ginger John from Manchester, who's gigging as well still. Let me think now. Ben Zephaniah, still with us, still doing quite a lot of work in between acting.
Yes, he's pretty big.
In fact, he was doing poetry in that Peaky Blinders, wasn't he? He's doing a bit of that, wasn't he? Kind of think of it.
He's actually working on a collection at the moment with a girl called Poppy Kleiser, who is a guest on a former episode, and I noticed recently they're working together. I don't know how that came about. It seems quite interesting what they're
That's all right, Ben's a good lad. Clarkey, obviously, still knocking around. LKJ. Mikey Smith was really important, but he was murdered in 1983.
Yeah.
So it's quite a sad loss. Swift Nick from Hull, who did a fanzine called New Youth.
Yeah. And is it a reasonable amount of stuff you can find on YouTube now, isn't it? It's still fairly difficult
on
to find
YouTube
stuff,
there's not a lot. There's not a lot because videos were quite new then, so a lot of stuff wasn't really recorded, to be honest. There's still the odd bit that turns out. I mean, one of my favourite things actually is before Ranting, but it's Roger McGough, who I'm not a huge fan of, but Roger McGough in The Liverbirds, which is a 70s sitcom, the early 70s of that, and excellent. He actually Roger McGough and all. So, but the two girls at Liverbirds go to the pub. So Liverpool sitcom, they go to the pub to watch Roger McGough do poetry, and that's quite exciting. In that it's just back then, it's just like that's an okay thing for working class people to do.
Yes,
So that's quite a nice little turn up. But fanzine wise, I mean, I've been looking under a lot of people's beds, going through carrier bags and attics, and just unearthing all sorts of stuff. So, yeah.
Actually, just because you mentioned it earlier, Bradford, every time I look at things, Bradford always pops up.
There was a lot of stuff going on Bradford.
Any particular reason on that? Or just maybe there were just a couple
of
people?
I think Swells, Ginger John at the time, Jules all lived in Bradford, as did a guy called Nick Tocek, who ran a really big punk club called Adam and Eve's in Leeds. He lived in Bradford as well. So Nick put on a hell of a lot of gigs around Leeds, and in those days loads and loads of bands would have poets in between.
Yes.
So we're gigging with all sorts of bands, and Nick definitely was a major part of that. And I was up there myself quite a few times, saw some good bands, saw some good poets. Nick included, top lad.
We have some more poetry maybe.
Let's have a look. Alright, as we're sat up in Stanford Hill, this is a poem called Kosher Village. On a manor it said, a man who's not had a heart attack by 40 is saying his wife can't cook, and who can live with such shame? See me at Maggie's bar, but the meat of the going up and coming down. We like a bit of a laugh, always at. See a picture of yourself reflected in the pool of your pint. Laugh or you'll go under. It's your round goes around. For years the tracksuit blokes have a grand change in hands but never spent. I may walk away, briskly even, but I will never run. From Stanford Hill, where the Heimish are from.
Thank you, man. Cheers. I'd like to talk next about the vinyl that was put out.
There was some records put out. I think the first one would have been the split single with Tiller and Swells, which was recorded in Wandsworth, I think. So that would be about 81, 82, around then. And that was quite exciting at the time. I mean, it was good. A lot of small bands, small labels were kicking around at the time, which I think is a very positive thing. Not unlike people doing YouTube hits, I suppose, but more hard work.
Yes. And you've also got to lug it around with you.
And you've got to lug it around with you, exactly.
And how did they come about? Was that artists themselves pressing it, or were people coming forward?
It was small labels coming forward and thinking, actually, there's something bubbling away here, let's have a slice of it. And then there was another one with Swells. Rising Sun and Ranting Verse was Swells and Little Brother. Jules did some pretty good records. Ben Zeff and I did some great records.
So maybe next we can talk about Stand Up and Spit. and it's probably easiest if you just explain what it is and what's happening with that.
Yeah, well, I was chatting, actually, funny enough, I think it was with Niall on the Facebook, just about sort of ranting poetry, and then one of the ladies who runs Speaking Volumes kind of saw that conversation, was like, let's come and have a chat. And that kind of led me to start doing a blog, and that was kind of painful because I've always hated bloggers for good reasons. But now I am one, you know. Nietzsche was right, we all become that which we hate. So I started just really digging through my old fanzines, just collating stuff, and now I've sort of pestering all my mates and going through their fanzines and putting together quite a lot of stuff. I mean, I'm not overly commenting on, because I think it's good to let things talk for themselves. Which then spun round to us putting a season of gigs, which we've had a couple of them, there's a few more coming up. So we've got a lot of the old ranters together. They're doing bits and pieces. We've got some ranting, we've got some discussions, we've got an event focusing on Mikey Smith, obviously because he's dead, so quite excited by that one actually. And it's really just kind of looking at that moment in history and linking it up with young writers today, because unless it kind of has something to say with young people, young writers today, then I don't really see much point in doing it. So it's important there's like young voices in there as well. Yeah, so interesting enough, we've also got funding from the Heritage Lottery Fund, which means that ranting is now officially heritage.
It must be a nice feeling, huh?
I feel like a Toby jug, it's brilliant.
We'll have to take you on the Antiques Roadshow, get you valued.
I'm rapidly decreasing.
It's got a few cracks.
Yeah, more than a few.
And why is it important to do this?
I think for me, on one level, at some point someone else is going to come along and be the expert on it.
Yeah.
And I was like, actually I was there, so I'm taking it.
Yeah.
So I'm doing it. Also, I think it became apparent to me that when I'm working with young writers, there's no real history of spoken word. Like, young writers always have a shock that there was spoken word before hip hop.
Yeah.
Actually, I was going to say not always, but let's face it, they do.
Yeah.
So on the one level, I think it's really exciting how vibrant and diverse spoken word scene is at the moment, which is a really good thing, and I'm really pleased to have been a part of that history. At the same time, I want the sort of true history of it to be known, and the true history isn't arts organisations making it happen. The true history is fanzines and scumbags doing it.
Yes, yeah, and it's good that you're. It's happening at a time where at least, you know, it seems like the majority of people are still around to talk to, and even if there isn't much of a physical record of, you know, even if some stuff has disappeared, it's got the stories.
Even the fanzine stuff were earthing out. I mean, I found interviews of me that I've completely forgotten about, which is that was quite weird. But I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there winkling it out. But also the whole fanzine is interesting. Let's take someone like Linton. So he'll have a new album out. He'll be on tour. He'll have interviews in the main music papers, which everyone would have read. So these are like national newspapers, so like NME, Sound, stuff like that. At the same time, you're doing a fanzine interview, and so each town would have a couple of fanzines. So these are quite small readerships. At the same time as he'd be on tour, he'd be doing fanzine interviews. And what he says in the national papers, as opposed to the fanzines, is actually quite different. And what he says in the fanzines is actually quite revealing. So even just comparing the two and putting them up at the, you know, these are done at the same time is quite interesting.
And I suppose, go back to the point about younger people on the spoken word circuit now referring a lot to hip hop, I suppose in a way they can't be held to account too much, because there is very little record. You know, if you go on YouTube, which is sort of the default research mechanism, you will find stuff back to 1988, or, you know, and when music videos really started.
You'll find stuff that goes to where the internet starts. That's the window pane of history. And we're just before it.
Maybe we could take another poem, please.
All right. Oh yeah, let's have a look. So this is a poem by Rowena Tosh. And it goes like this: little drops of vomit flying through the air, cover upturned faces looking up to stare. Little drops of vomit, diced carrots always there. Down amongst the crunchy bits with lots more to spare. So get your straws out, people, suck it up with flair. So more small drops of vomit can come flying through the air.
Cheers. So, like I said before, I spoke with Janine Booth recently, and she said that she hoped that the Stand Up and Spit project would, rather than being a retrospective, would actually become a revival. And without touching on it too much, because it's still winding me right up, but with the election result, maybe, you know, it might become a real possibility that this could become a kind of revival. Even if it's not a revival of ranting, it could be.
Well, I don't think we actually need a revival.
No.
I think spoken word is in a pretty good place.
Yeah.
There's things that annoy me about it, but that kind of at the same time tells me how good it is, because unless you've got something to punch, then life's pretty dull.
Yeah.
But I think it's quite apparent from, certainly I was surprised going through 14 months of blogging now, is how we're actually saying the same thing then as we are now, and how we still got the same enemies and we're still fighting the same things. But there are young writers talking about that and dealing with that as well, and surprisingly enough there are actually some writers doing it entertainingly and intelligently, which is more to the point. So I think the young writers are there, and that's why I don't think we need a revival. I think we need some encouragement and we need a sense of history, but they also need to be the ones running with it.
Yeah.
So I'm glad to be a part of it, but being an old futurist, I want the young ones to kick my ass, just not too hard.
Oh, that's a nice attitude. And speaking of that, are there any particular younger spoken word artists or poets that you think are sort of carrying on that tradition?
I think Emily Harrison, definitely. Shemaine Suleiman, Sophie Hall I saw recently. She was quite interesting. What's his ass? Keith. Oh yeah, Keith Jarrett.
Keith Jarrett, yeah.
Keith Jarrett got a lot of time for. So yeah, there's quite a few out there. Holly McNeish's stuff recently.
Yeah, I was really impressed as well with Joshua at the last Stand Up and Spit thing.
Actually, Joshua's superb. Yeah, he learned
really
that Mikey Smith poem.
Yeah.
Actually, he was superb at that. That was I was really pleased by that actually. Yeah, well done, Joshua.
Yeah, no, he's good for that. I'm hoping to get him down at my night, but he's busy boy, I think. Maybe we could have another poem.
This is another Stephen Wells poem. This is called Police Dog. Drizzling rain, heavy fog, been swamped by the drug squad. A police dog sniffs out of vitamin pills. Speed kills, these build your muscles. What are these, punk? Do you take drugs? The constable snarls. The dog looks puzzled. I'm quite fond of puppy dogs, it's pigs that should be muzzled.
Yeah, cheers, Tim. I think that's it, unless there's anything in particular you wanted to mention about.
Yeah.
Stand Up and Spit.
Definitely. So the next gig, when are you looking at putting this out?
This will go out before the thing on Friday. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So the next gig coming up is on Friday 15th of May. That's at the British Library. That's a discussion. We've got Suzanne Moore, Gary Bushell, Selena Godden, myself and Professor Matthew Worley looking at Angry Kids of the 80s, fanzines and ranting. Then on 13th of June we've got there's a fanzine workshop in Clerkenwell, and we'll be having Mickey Brenny from Lush and Joe England, who does a really good football fanzine, literary fanzine that sells at West Ham called Push, and myself, and then there'll be some poetry in the Trotwood, which will be fun.
Yeah, I would recommend going along to that.
I'm actually going to be singing Hurry Up Harry at that, so yeah, that'll be good. And then Thursday the 18th of June at Camden Town Hall, we got pretty much all the ranters that are alive and out of prison.
That looks like a great gig as well.
So yeah, that's going to be quality. So we've got Linton, Clarkey, Ginger John, Attila, Porky, Jules, and yeah, a lot of people. That's going to be good.
Yeah, nice one. And so also what we'll do is below the video I'll have the link to the Stand Up and Spit blog.
Sweet.
So people can just click on that, because whenever I read out websites on here, no one ever understands them. So
brilliant.
yeah, cheers Tim. Thanks very much.